My wife stood up in a divorce courtroom and told the judge I was just a truck driver. She said it with total confidence, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like 22 years of marriage had taught her everything she needed to know about the man sitting across from her in that room. Her attorney nodded along. His sister, sitting in the gallery, gave a small, satisfied smile. I didn't say a word. I just looked at my attorney. Earl, who was 63 years old, had been practicing family law for 35 years, and had the patience of a man who had seen every variation of human overconfidence ever produced. He gave me the smallest nod I have ever seen one person give another in my life, like a blink, like a comma. And I thought about the first truck. I bought it in 1999. 3 months after Diane and I got married. A used Peterbilt 379. Purple gray. IS. 2 million miles on it. With a cab that smelled like diesel and old coffee and something I could never quite identify. I paid $28,000 for it. I drove it myself for the first 2 years. I slept in the cab 3 nights a week. I ran the Midwest corridor and the southeastern distribution routes. I ate gas station food and called home when I could, and I saved every dollar that wasn't going back into the business. Diane knew all of that. She knew I had a truck. She knew I drove it. What she never fully understood, what she never cared enough to ask about, was everything that came after that truck. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what Earl always says. Start at the beginning. Let it breathe. Let them catch up to you. So let me start at the beginning. I grew up in a small town in Indiana, the youngest of 4 boys. And I watched my father work himself nearly to nothing at a factory that paid him a living wage and nothing else for 31 years. He was a good man. He worked hard. He believed that working hard was enough, that if you showed up, did what you were told, and kept your head down, you would be okay. He was okay, but only okay. I made a decision somewhere around 17 years old that I was going to figure out what the difference was between the people who were okay and the people who were building something. I didn't know what that thing would be yet. I just knew there was a difference, and I was going to find it. I drove for a regional carrier right out of high school. I got my CDL at 19. I was good at it. The hours didn't bother me. I could read roads and weather and traffic in a way that turned out to be more instinct than skill, and I saved aggressively, while most of the other young drivers were spending on trucks they didn't own and weekends they'd regret. I met Diane at a bar in Columbus when I was 26. She was 24. She had a job in marketing at a mid-size firm. She was smart. She was funny. And she was the kind of beautiful that makes you drive carefully for the rest of the night, because you're still thinking about it. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged. We got married. And 2 weeks before the wedding, we signed a prenuptial agreement. That is the detail that matters more than anything else I'm about to tell you. So I want you to hold it in your mind while the rest of this story unfolds. We signed a prenuptial agreement. Our attorneys drew it up. We both reviewed it. We both signed it. Diane told me, years later, that she signed it because she didn't think it would ever matter. She was making more money than I was at the time. She had a career trajectory. I had a used truck and a CDL. The prenup, in Hamint, was a formality she was agreeing to out of patience, not necessity. That's what she told me. I thought about that a lot in the months leading up to the divorce. But 2006, 7 years into our marriage, I owned 3 trucks. I had incorporated the business under a name that was deliberately boring Midwest Freight Solutions LLC, and I had quietly hired 2 drivers who I paid well, treated like professionals. and gave equity stakes to after 2 years of strong performance. That part was my idea. Keep the good ones. Make them partners. Make them care about the outcome. Diane knew the business existed. She knew I was running some trucks. She attended the first company Christmas party in our living room with 6 people. She smiled and made appetizers and was pleasant to everyone, and then, after the guests left, asked me if this was really going anywhere or if we should start thinking about a more stable plan. I told her it was going somewhere. She said she hoped so. What I didn't tell her, and I want to be clear here, because I've thought about this a lot, I didn't hide the business from her out of secrecy or manipulation. I kept it quiet because every time I brought it up, her eyes went somewhere else. She wasn't interested. She had her career, her friends, her sister Carol, who she talked to 3 times a day, and a vision of her life that didn't really include the operational details of a trucking company. So I stopped volunteering the details. I kept building. By 2010, I had 11 trucks. By 2014, I had 23. I moved into regional distribution contracts, long-term agreements with manufacturers in Ohio and Michigan and Illinois that provided predictable revenue and room to scale. I hired a full-time operations manager. I brought on a CFO. I moved the company out of a rented storage unit and into an actual facility. And I still drove once a week. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because driving is where I think clearly, where the noise goes quiet, and where I feel most like myself. Some men play golf. Some fish. I drive. Diane, by this point, had left her marketing firm to open a boutique home goods store with her sister, Carol. I supported that fully. I put $0,000 of company revenue into that venture, channeled through personal accounts so it looked like general household income. I did that because I loved her and I wanted her to succeed and I believed in her. That store failed in 18 months. Most of the money was gone. We didn't fight about it. I told her we'd be fine. We were fine. What I didn't know then, what I would only find out much later, was what Carol had started saying about me around that time. But I'll get to Carol. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing. Stories like this one take time to tell the right way. And your support makes it possible to keep telling them. The first real sign that something was wrong in my marriage wasn't an argument. It wasn't a cold dinner or a slammed door or any of the things people imagine when they picture a marriage starting to fail. It was a question. We were driving home from my nephew's wedding in the summer of 2018. Both of us, quiet in the car, the way you sometimes are after too much socializing. And Diane said, out of nowhere, "Do you ever feel like we're not the same people we were when we got married?" I thought about the question. I said yes. Honestly, I told her I thought that was usually a good thing, that people grow. That changing together was different from growing apart. She looked out the window and didn't say anything for a long time. "Carol thinks I could do better," she said finally. I didn't respond right away. I kept my eyes on the road. I thought about all the things I could say about Carol, about the 18 months of failed business, about the way Carol had always looked at me, like I was something on the bottom of her shoe at a nice restaurant. I said, "What do you think?" She didn't answer. I should have pushed. I should have sat down and had the real conversation that night, instead of letting it slide back under the surface where we both pretended it hadn't happened. But I was tired. And I was stubborn. And I believed the way you believe things when you don't want to stop believing them, that we would be okay. We were not going to be okay. The next 2 years were a slow deterioration that I kept trying to patch with normalcy. Date nights that felt like job interviews. Vacations where we were both present and both somewhere else at the same time. Phone calls that got shorter. Silences that got longer. And Carol. Always Carol. Circling at the edge of everything. Carol had divorced her own husband in 2017. She had gotten a settlement she described as fair, and that her ex-husband described as orchestrated. She had moved 15 minutes from our house. She and Diane had lunch 3 times a week. Minimum. I'm not saying Carol destroyed my marriage. I'm saying she found something in it that was already cracked, and she pressed on it with both hands for 3 years. In the spring of 2020, during a global pandemic that had somehow become the least complicated part of my life, Diane told me she wanted a divorce. I sat with that for a moment. I asked her if she was sure. She said yes. I asked her if this was what she wanted, or what someone had convinced her she should want. She said that wasn't a fair question. I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry for whatever I hadn't been. I told her I hoped she'd be happy. And then, privately, quietly, I called Earl. Earl Hutchison. Earl of 23 years of billing records that began with a prenup review in 1999. Earl, who had incorporated Midwest Freight Solutions and structured every subsequent entity in the network. Earl, who had drafted the shareholder agreements and the real estate holdings and the IP registrations and the vendor contracts. Earl, who knew, to the dollar, what I was worth. I told him Diane wanted a divorce. He said he was sorry. He meant it. And then he asked me one question. Does she know? I told him she didn't know the full scope. I told him she thought I was comfortable that I made a decent living from the trucking operation, but that I didn't think she had any concept of the actual numbers. Earl was quiet for a moment. Then we need to be very methodical, he said. And we need to let them make the first move. Here is what Diane's attorney did. He filed a motion for asset discovery. As expected, he submitted a financial declaration on Diane's behalf that characterized me as a self-employed commercial driver with a small fleet operation and an estimated personal income in the range of $90. $0,000 $0,000 per year. 90,000 to 120,000. That number sat in the filing like a pebble in a pond. Quietly. Without any ripples. Until Earl decided to create some. Our response to their discovery request was, by Earl's design, perfectly complete, perfectly organized, and approximately 600 pages long. 47 trucks. 11 active government and commercial distribution contracts. 3 real estate holdings related to company operations. A subsidiary logistics coordination firm organized in 2016. Total company valuation, as assessed by an independent business appraiser retained by our team, $14. 3 millions. Net personal assets. After company structure, $2. 1 million. Annual income. 3-year, average $890. Ling ling ling. I was not a truck driver who made $90. 000 a year. I was the owner of a $14 million operation who happened to still drive once a week because he liked to. Would you have seen it coming? If you were Diane's attorney, and that packet landed on your desk 600 pages of what you thought was going to be a simple blue-collar divorce, would you have known what you were looking at? I wonder about that sometimes. The pretrial conference was the first time I saw Diane's expression change. Up to that point, she had been confident, composed. Carol was in her ear. Her attorney was assuring her that the financials would shake out in her favor, that I'd been modest about my income, that they'd press for a 50/50 split plus support. Then Earl handed opposing counsel the summary sheet. I watched Diane's attorney read it. I watched his expression do something complicated, a kind of collapse in slow motion, where the confident lawyer face dissolved and underneath it was just a man who needed a minute. He set the paper down. He picked it up again. He looked at me. I looked at Earl. Earl looked at nobody in particular. Because Earl had known this moment was coming for 3 months and had decided to be calm about it. Diane leaned over and whispered something to her attorney. He whispered back. She looked at the paper. She looked at me. This was the woman who had shared a bed with me for 22 years and did not know what I had built. And in that moment, I felt something I wasn't expecting. I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't angry. I was sad. Genuinely. Deeply sad, not for myself, but for the 22 years of a marriage that had contained a man she'd never taken the time to understand. She had not wanted to know, and I had not made her. We were both responsible for the gap between us. That's the truth. That's the part of this story that doesn't fit neatly into justice or karma or revenge. We had both failed the marriage, just in very different directions. But the business was mine. Every truck, every contract, every early morning, every night in a diesel-smelling cab in the dark between one city and another. The prenup, as Earl reminded opposing counsel, was extremely clear on that point. What happened in the weeks after that conference was something I can only describe as escalating creative legal attempts to reframe a very simple document. Diane's attorney argued the prenup was signed under duress. Earl produced documentation showing both parties had independent legal counsel during the drafting period. That argument lasted about 48 hours. Then they argued that my deliberate concealment of assets constituted fraudulent misrepresentation that should void the prenup. Earl produced 22 years of tax returns filed jointly, signed by Diane, that clearly showed the company income. She had signed every one. That argument lasted about a week. Then they argued that Diane's contribution to the household during the marriage had enhanced my ability to build the business and therefore entitled her to a portion of the business growth beyond the prenup terms. That argument was the most creative. Earl spent 2 days carefully dismantling it with the specific financial record of the $180,000. I had contributed to her business venture, a contribution that, he noted, had resulted in a total loss with no corresponding return to the marital estate. I want to be clear, I was never trying to leave Diane with nothing. The prenup was structured to protect the business, not to punish her. She was entitled to the marital assets outside the business, the home, the joint accounts, the shared property accumulated over the marriage. That was fair. That was what we had agreed to. She received those things. She was not left without resources. But the business was not part of that. It never had been. There is something I need to tell you about Carol that changes the shape of this story. Earl had advised me, months before the divorce proceedings began, to hire a private investigator, not for anything dramatic, not because I suspected Diane of infidelity or any other misconduct. He advised it because in complex divorce proceedings involving hidden assets, and he knew from experience that opposing counsel would try to find hidden assets on my side, it was worth understanding whether there were any surprises on the other side. The investigator I hired was a retired state police detective named Wes. Wes was quiet, methodical, and had a gift for finding things that didn't want to be found. What Wes found was not what anyone expected. Carol had been, for approximately 2.5 years before the divorce filing, consulting with Diane's attorney, not as a client, as a referral source. Carol had been directing clients, women going through divorces, women she met through a support group she attended after her own divorce, to this particular attorney. In exchange for referrals, Carol received a fee arrangement that was, Wes explained to me carefully, technically within legal boundaries, but ethically murky at best. What this meant was that Carol had a financial relationship with the attorney she had encouraged her sister to hire. When Earl presented this to opposing counsel in a closed meeting, not in open court, just between the attorneys, the tenor of the entire negotiation changed overnight. It didn't end the divorce. It didn't change what Diane was or wasn't entitled to, but it removed Carol from the conversation in a very permanent way. Her attorney quietly withdrew from the referral arrangement. Carol stopped attending the legal strategy meetings. And Diane, for the first time since the divorce began, started making decisions based on what she actually wanted, instead of what her sister had convinced her to pursue. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with Diane about 3 weeks before everything was finalized. Her attorney had arranged for us to meet privately, not a mediation session. Just the two of us in a conference room with no lawyers present, which both teams had agreed to allow. She looked tired, not devastated. Diane was never a woman who let you see devastation, but genuinely tired in the way that comes from months of fighting something you didn't fully understand. She asked me why I'd never told her. I thought about the answer to that question for a long time before I gave it. I told her that I had tried. Early on, I had tried to talk about the business, to show her what I was building, to share the details of what I was doing and where it was going. And every time, I'd watched her attention drift somewhere else. So I'd stopped trying. I built the thing in the space between us. In the silence, she left. And I let her believe what she wanted to believe, because correcting it required an engagement she never offered. She was quiet. She said, "I think I let Carol tell me who you were instead of figuring it out myself." I told her I thought she was probably right. She said, "I'm sorry." I told her I was too. We sat in that conference room for another 20 minutes and talked about nothing complicated: her store, my nephew's kids, a trip we'd taken to Colorado, and then we shook hands, which is a strange thing to do with someone you were married to for 22 years. And we walked out. That was the last real conversation we had. The settlement was finalized in November. Diane received the house, the one we'd lived in together, the one she had decorated and maintained and made a home. She received the joint savings account. She received the vehicle she drove. She received a fair division of all marital assets accumulated during the marriage. She received nothing related to Midwest Freight Solutions or any of its subsidiaries. The prenup held every line of it. Her attorney, a different one by this point, told Earl that, off the record, it was one of the most comprehensive prenuptial agreements he had seen from a couple at that income level at the time of signing. He said whoever drafted it had clearly been thinking long-term. Earl told him he had always tried to think long-term. I want to tell you what happened with Carol, because I think it matters. Carol did not come out of this well. Not because of anything I did, I want to be clear about that. I never pursued Carol legally. I never involved her in any formal proceeding. What happened to Carol happened because of Carol. The referral arrangement she'd had with Diane's original attorney was reported to the State Bar Association by someone I genuinely don't know, possibly a client she'd referred who became unhappy with the outcome of their own case. Possibly someone from within that law firm who had concerns. I only know that it was not me. Earl confirmed it was not him. An inquiry was opened. I don't know the outcome of that inquiry because it was none of my business. What I do know is that Carol moved out of the area about 8 months after the divorce was finalized. Diane told me this herself. In a text. With what I read as a complicated mixture of relief and grief, I didn't respond to that text. There wasn't anything to say that would have helped. It has been a little over 3 years since the divorce was finalized. The business is still running. We added our 52nd truck in the spring. My operations manager, a man named Derek, who has been with me for 11 years, will take over the company in about 7 years when I'm ready to step back. He'll earn it. He's been earning it since day one. I still drive once a week. The truck is a 2022 model now. Different cab. No diesel smell. GPS integrated everything. It doesn't feel quite the same as the old Peterbilt, but the road is the same. The silence is the same. The thinking is the same. I think about what I would do differently. Not with the business. The business I built the right way. And I'm proud of it, in the way you can only be proud of something you built with your own hands and your own stubbornness and too many years of early mornings. With the marriage, I think about what I would do differently. I think I would have pushed harder to be seen. Not for credit. I was never building anything for credit, but because the person who loves you should know who you are. I let Diane fill in the blank with whatever was easier. And that blank space was eventually filled by her sister's voice instead of mine. That's on me as much as anyone. Here's what I need you to take from this. If you're taking anything at all, the man who drives the truck is not always just the man who drives the truck. The woman who rings you up at the counter is not always just the cashier. The person sitting quietly across from you at a family dinner, absorbing whatever assumptions you're making about them, they have a whole life happening in the space your assumptions never reach. I'm not saying be afraid of underestimating people as some kind of warning about getting caught. I'm saying be curious. Be actually curious about the person in front of you. Ask the real questions. Don't let somebody else tell you who they are. 22 years is a long time to be standing next to someone and not fully see them. I was standing next to her too. I know that. The trucks are still running. The road is still out there. And I'm still driving. Some things don't change. Some things were always mine. If you found something in this story worth keeping, a like on this video genuinely helps more people find it. And if you have a story about someone who underestimated you, someone who found out the hard way what you'd really been building, I'd be honored to hear it in the comments. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves. And don't ever let someone else write the story of who you are.